Hello, this is Zsófilter, the feminist podcast of Partizán, an independent online Hungarian media channel. My name is Zsófi Balog, and my guest today is Helen Taylor, Vice President of Impact for Exodus Cry, an international organization committed to abolishing sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. Originally from London, England, Helen has been involved in the fight against sex trafficking since 2007. She is currently based in Los Angeles, California. Now she's visiting Budapest because her organization's latest documentary film, Buying Her, is being screened at Toldi Cinema on the day of this podcast recording. Our international listeners, welcome to Partizán's podcast channel. You can find out more about us on our YouTube and social media platforms, and if you can, please support our work through our Patreon. Helen, welcome to Hungary. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on your podcast, and we're excited to be here.
Thank you for making time for this interview. And before we get into what your organization does exactly in detail, I would like to bring the topic of porn and prostitution closer to the listeners, especially Hungarian listeners. So, a famous former Hungarian porn producer, István Kovács, who is known by the name Kovi here, has recently said in an interview, porn is like a fairy tale for adults, where they can step into this kind of fantasy world that they wouldn't get to experience in real life. And he dismisses the harms of porn by saying, just like when somebody watches horror movies, they won't go out killing people afterwards. So he says porn itself doesn't cause violence. How would you respond to that?
Wow, there's so much to unpack there. When bringing a critique against porn, I feel like it's really important to talk about the ways that the harms of the people in the production side of it, and the ways that women are coerced or exploited, and the violence that even the performers experience. Obviously, there's a ton of illegal pornography, and we've worked with a lot of survivors who were under 18, who were young teens in illegal pornography production. So that's one part of this conversation. There's a reason that often rapists or pedophiles, very hardcore, violent, pornographic content is found on their laptops. The Super Bowl is the biggest, watched sporting game in America, and the ads, the commercials are paid millions of dollars to show your ad during the game. And I think everybody deep down knows that marketing is powerful, that companies are willing to spend so much money on a few seconds of an advert because they know that the way that humans internalize and absorb visual media has an impact on behavior. And so it's incredibly naive and deflective to just say consuming pornography has no impact on behavior, and that's just not at all what we're seeing. And then the other side of the exploitation in porn that our organization has been particularly addressing the last 3 years is the distribution side. And so much of porn that isn't made in studios in like Hollywood, where we're from, in Los Angeles, is uploaded under the YouTube style of pornography on tube sites, where it's amateur style or homemade videos or illegally taken videos against people's consent, and these websites don't verify age or consent. And so 3 years ago, our organization began to really expose how the website PornHub was not verifying age and consent, and that resulted in them having to delete 10 million videos, 80% of their entire website. So there's like those three angles of the harm to the consumer, especially the child, and the real ethical problems in the way that pornography is made and distributed.
We can get into your campaign Trafficking Hub that you just mentioned against PornHub, because I think that's an astonishing success that you got them to delete all these videos, 10 million videos. How do you even start something like this?
Yeah, well, it's crazy because we didn't even plan to start that campaign. It kind of just happened. I think with campaigns that go really viral, it's one of those things. The timing was so unplanned. It all began right before COVID. And I think the conditions of lockdown made people really pay attention to what was going on. But basically in the media, we kept seeing case after case of underage girls being found on PornHub. And so there was a case of a 15-year-old girl who'd been missing, who was trafficked. 58 videos were found of this girl. That was even how they located her. And 58 videos under a verified account on PornHub were uploaded. And my colleague at the time, Lila Micklethwait, was reading story after story about these really disturbing situations and began asking the question, like, how did these videos end up on what at the time was considered the most mainstream porn site? PornHub is like the darling website of MindGeek. MindGeek owned the majority of all online PornTube websites. But at the time, they'd really successfully branded PornHub as this like cheeky pop culture, New York Fashion Week, like billboards in Times Square. And we began just tweeting about PornHub specifically and sharing the stories. Were asked to write an op-ed. And the day after that op-ed, titled "It's Time to Shut Down PornHub," kind of just laying out our case of this is what we've discovered. And Lila realized that to upload a video, all you needed was an email address. And so they weren't verifying meaningfully your age or consent in any way. Anyone could upload something and it wouldn't be checked. And for these websites, they just want them like the most content possible. So it's not in their interest to do vigorous moderating, we later discovered. But so what happened was this op-ed went viral. The very next day, this story of a 15-year-old or 14-year-old girl, Rose Kalemba, was reported on by the BBC. And so the fact of these two stories and articles came out day after day, thousands of articles began being written about what was happening as a result of those two articles coming out. And we started a petition, calling PornHub to be held accountable. And over 2 million people signed that petition. And those are things that you can't make happen. We've done other videos before that haven't gone viral, and I think it was just the timing. 34 million people watched our animated video on PornHub, and I think it just hit a nerve in the culture of people who trusted this porn brand, and then to discover, oh no, this porn website that you might be watching is riddled and rife with videos of exploitative, underage trafficking, abuse victims, revenge porn victims. And so then it just, one thing led to another, and we were thinking strategically, like, what is it going to take to hold them accountable? And we had some different strategy meetings. And the power of social media, I really feel like this campaign highlighted to me how when people get involved and share on Instagram and these petitions online, that is how the word gets spread around the world. And past abolitionist movements, to get thousands of signatures would have taken them years, and going from town to town. And that's when technology can really be used for the good, to be able to share what's happening. And so basically, by the end of that year, the New York Times reached out, an investigative journalist, Nick Kristof, who'd written about the topic of human trafficking. He heard about what was happening through our campaign, reached out, did his own investigation. He interviewed survivors and really discovered exactly what we'd been saying as well. And the credit card companies, we'd been talking to them all year and explaining that like illegal content is being monetized by your companies. And but it wasn't until the New York Times article came out, and that was on the front page, December 2020, so 10 months since the campaign launched. The credit card companies all cut ties with PornHub as a result. That very same week, they removed the download button. We had a whole list of things that we were saying, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. And they decided to delete 10 million videos, 80% of their site, all their unverified content. And even under their currently verified content, they still don't verify consent of every uploader and person in the video in the way that we're pushing for. But since that happened, suddenly legislators are paying attention. They're realizing there's a cultural moment right now where people are opening their eyes to the exploitation in pornography of women and children. And I think in the past, if you critiqued porn, you were just seen as, oh, you're sex negative, or you're a prude, or you must be religious, or like having some kind of, it wasn't popular to critique porn unless you're a radical feminist. But now, just in the taxi on the way over here, we were talking with the taxi driver and he was wanting to watch our films. He was making a note of them, talking about pornography. He just had a conversation with his 12-year-old daughter who's just been exposed to porn. And so I think parents are realizing how important this is. Young people, Billie Eilish speaking out about the harms of violent porn to her, like, this is a really exciting cultural moment to be having this conversation, because right now more than ever, people are waking up to how harmful pornography is, and how big porn is a multi-billion-dollar industry really trying to shape the sexualities of young people. And I think that's very worthy of a critique. And I feel so excited by the progress we've seen and the progress that we are going to continue to see.
This is amazing. And the thing I always struggle with is people when their attention is turned to the abusive practices or the child trafficking aspects or all these things that are obviously very awful. They say, okay, that's not cool. That should be punished. That shouldn't be up there. But in general, they say, well, but porn is fine. Like the idea of porn itself is fine, even though most of the porn that is easily accessible, even for a child, contains just straight up rape of women and just uncomfortable scenes. You don't have to look for it. You don't have to. It's not in a little corner of the internet. Hardcore violent porn is mainstream now, but people are somehow not catching up. I mean, by people, I mean people who watch porn obviously know this, but just don't want to say they have seen that, and they use it and they consume it all the time. Mm-hmm. And people who don't know are just, I feel like they are still so naive about what porn is, because they just remember the VHS tapes or the magazines or whatever. Or they say, yeah, but I mean, you can just somehow be aware of this, raise some awareness, and, well, surely children are not watching that. Can you speak on that a little bit? Like, how pervasive it is, how mainstream it is, and why it's a misconception?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who spends 5 minutes on the homepage of PornHub realizes that gang rape, violent, aggressive acts against women, there's lots of studies that have shown that the majority of what is on current mainstream pornography websites now, between 70 and 80% of it has at least one of 5 aggressive acts towards women, such as choking, suffocating, hitting them, pulling their hair. And that's become so normalized to the point where teenagers, both boys and girls, that's how they are learning their sex education. And we interviewed on our podcast a nurse who deals with sexual assault cases of children and young teenagers in this hospital. And she said a lot of the sexual abuses of cases of teenagers are extremely pornographic in nature. And she's like, the abuser was a 13-year-old boy or a 12-year-old boy. Where is he getting these ideas from? And it's the peer-on-peer child sexual abuse as a result of young people being exposed to porn is really important to talk about the violence. Like, the trajectory of porn from Playboy in the 60s and 70s to now is so huge. We actually just screened one of our documentaries before the House of Lords in the UK. There's an online safety bill that they're trying to pass that would bring in a lot of amazing protections for children online, including pornography sites. And there was this feeling like we need our current politicians to understand what we mean when we say porn. We're not speaking about a softcore Playboy magazine. And everyone listening should also know that Playboy is rife with exploitation of women. Like, Playboy, there's nothing good about Playboy. But compared to what we are, where we're at right now with what children are being exposed to online, we were just talking about this before, and how the utter violence and degradation and strangling, the violence against women, and the BDSM, the hardcore acts. We made a 3-part film called Beyond Fantasy. This was the first episode was what was shown at the House of Lords. That episode focused on the fetishization of children in porn. So a girl might be legally 18, barely legal, but she's sexualized with lollipops and a teddy bear and braces on her teeth and made to look like a child, and how the schoolgirl fantasy is really problematic in how it sexualizes youth. And then we made another episode on the rampant STDs crisis in porn and how that impacts the performers. And then the third episode was all about the extreme hardcore violence in porn and how rape is really happening in porn, and producers and directors are pushing past performers' boundaries every day in porn. The contracts that they sign are woefully inadequate in explaining to them what could happen. And we had one director tell us on camera, like, my goal is to figure out what her boundary line is and to smash past that and capture her shock and her pain on camera. And I see it like a hardcore sport. And then we're reading all the violent hardcore titles of, like, babysitter gets effed by the stepdad, and like all these like titles of scenes that are depicting what we would in every other context in our society consider to be illegal sexual abuse, but somehow pornography, by putting a camera in the room, normalizes this, celebrates this, and anyone who critiques it is somehow shamed. Like, this is absolutely ridiculous. The porn industry is gaslighting the world, is gaslighting women and young people growing up thinking that this is normal sexuality. It is not normal. It is harmful, and it is destroying the brains and sexual templates and bodies of our young people.
The gaslighting aspect is so important because there is this, trope of the wife who finds the husband watching porn, and women have been shamed for like decades and decades. Yeah, and they are called prudish or whatever. They are just not up to the, cool and sexy thing of watching porn with a husband. Meanwhile, now more and more studies come out that porn consumption really does something to men's behavior towards women and how they perceive them, and how they can't even be aroused by normal human sexual behavior and healthy sex. And I find myself astonished when I talk to my women from my age group. I grew up in the 90s, so my experience with porn is finding magazines in my brother's drawer. And I don't think I got hooked on it, but it always like excited me. And so I also got this introduction very early on, but it's nothing compared to what's happening now when you go on the internet. But so I did consume porn before, but I always felt like so uncomfortable. And when it came to like real sexual experiences, I noticed even then, or whatever, 10 years ago, when I was still with guys, that's not the case anymore. But I always felt like I have to act out some kind of porn scene. Thankfully, I got rid of porn consumption years and years ago, but it took a long time to kind of get rid of these images, because as you said before, like these visual impacts are so powerful that we don't even realize. But my point is that I also wanted to mention is that talking to women from my age group who are heterosexual, they say that they actually enjoy being choked. And this is a thing that I keep hearing, like how they find it sexy and all that. And it's obviously a result of porn culture. Mm-hmm. Nobody was talking about enjoying choking, like, 20 years ago, or anal or whatever. I remember when I was a teenager, like anal was considered like, leave me the fuck alone with anal. Like, I'm not gonna, like, it was the new thing that men wanted to introduce mm-hmm. in the bedroom, in relationships. And now anal is so normalized mm-hmm. that teenagers are like proudly saying, yeah, we did that. So it's just incredible, like the speed, how it spread and how it got more and more hardcore and how it spills into your everyday life. Yet somehow it's still very hidden, or it's still considered like a taboo to really talk about this. Mm. Like, what is it that you get aroused by when you watch this? Why are you looking for this kind of content? And I find it so hard to talk to even women and some, like, kind of make them understand, like, this is not okay. like you wouldn't let anyone choke you on the street or here. You wouldn't let a friend choke you. Like, how is it okay in a sexual context? So obviously you've been dealing with this a lot longer than I have, this topic, but I wonder, what is it you think is effective when starting the conversation with people who don't really know how?
I think it's easier for me, because this is my job and my work. I find myself talking about it all the time. And even on the train a few days ago, a guy just has so many questions. And so I actually feel like people are really interested in and do have questions. And it's almost like, oh, somebody who I can talk about this with, they want to unleash all their questions. When someone is being lightly choked, the dopamine in the brain and the adrenaline kicked in, like your body begins to go into survival mode, thinking, I can't breathe, and this like rush of adrenaline. And the fact that is being sexualized is really sad and disturbing to me, because there have been numerous cases where women have actually died in this case. And then it's like, well, he didn't murder her. It was a sex game gone wrong. And it's like yet another way that we're being harmed violently by men, but this time it's in the context of a consenting relationship. Like, that's really sad. And I spoke to a couple not long ago, and choking was a part of their sex life. And I really kind of challenged them both on, like, why do you think it's okay for violence to be part of your sex? Like, is that healthy? Let's unpack that. Where did that come from? Why do you think that's, is that a healthy type of arousal? We know that a lot of children who go through sexual abuse, when your first sexual experience, your imprint, is related to something violent, however your sexuality is awakened, especially if it's in quite a dramatic way. And we've had people who were former dominatrixes tell us that a lot of times men would come to them and they realized they were asking them to recreate a scene of a childhood sexual abuse where they're being like called what they were called as a child, or it's like a mother, son, or a teacher or a coach, and they're asking the dominatrix to abuse them like they were abused as a child, but sexualize this. And it's the attempt to try and regain a sense of control of, like, well, I don't want to be choked against my will, but if I choose that, then I'm regaining some kind of agency in it. And I feel like that's such a twisted and warped perception, and we need to be able to be more bold about challenging violence as part of a healthy sexual life. Like, it doesn't make it more exciting or loving. It's actually really harmful and disturbing. And we've had many men send us messages saying, my girlfriend has asked to do this, but I don't want to choke her. And where is this coming from? And exactly like you said, it's porn teaching women that this is what men want. It's porn teaching men that this is what women want. And so they are choking them during sex, often without even asking their permission. And we're like, let's normalize non-violence in sex and mutual agency and healthy boundaries and consent and like love and affection that is anti-violent. I think in so many other cultural contexts, it's socially acceptable to critique violence, and somehow not in sex, where it's causing some of the most damage to sexual relationships. And we made a documentary called Raised on Porn that's free for anyone to watch on YouTube. And during that documentary, a girl shares how her first sexual relationship, age 16, the guy was watching porn and said that his biggest fantasy was like this porn scene that he would watch the girl being punched in the face to the point of getting a nosebleed. And then he would finish on her face, and it was called a cherry sundae. And she was so scared that he was going to do this. And he said, oh, no, but the whole thing is that I don't tell you when I'm going to do it. It's like, it's a surprise. And she broke up with him, of course, but she was like, this was a good guy until we started watching porn and thinking that this was normal and this is what girls want. And it had been so sexualized in what he'd been watching as an addiction. So I feel like for anyone wanting to start this conversation, I mean, the documentaries we make are to educate people, to help people understand the impact of porn exposure on the brain, on relationships, on our world, on society. We want to be able to empower people in how to critique what's happening right now, and for people wanting to understand more, like educating yourself and knowing that it's okay to critique what's happening in our culture and push back and challenge and do that boldly. And if anyone says, well, you're just kink shaming, I'm like, I will happily kink shame a lot of things that I believe are causing women and children great harm in our culture.
Yeah, that's what I want to say. Yeah, I kink shame. Yes. Yeah, it's amazing that you're somehow edgy by saying that you just want to have like normal sex without violence. And like, what is happening? World? And yeah, there's this, vanilla. I joke with this word, like I use it as a joke. Like I just like vanilla sex. Like I'm lazy. I want to be comfortable. Just leave me alone with the fucking acrobatic. Like I don't even want to like do gymnastics. Like just. And, and this is something that, your friends are like, oh, really? Like, you don't even want to try the thing and the other thing and the next thing. I'm like, no, I finally grown up enough to like let go of these, like all these things that were like somehow expected and all these like adventure seeking in sex. And I had to realize like, I don't want adventures. Like, I want to be comfy. I want to feel good. I thought this was the point. Anyway. I want to talk a little bit about your film that is being screened right now, Buying Her, Megvettelek in Hungarian, because I think it's so important in this film that it connects porn consumption to buying prostituted women. Mm-hmm. And porn and prostitution is usually talked about like separately. Like you talk about porn and then you talk about prostitution, human trafficking. I loved in the film that it brings it all together because it's the same topic basically. And also I found that not everybody is happy, even in feminist circles, about this film because it focuses on men, which I find interesting because I always thought that we always talk about victims, we always talk about women and how women can fight this and whatever. And finally, there's a film and there's a project that focuses on men and how they can, talk to each other. Did you meet this controversy or this like debate, or did you have to like respond to this?
Yeah. I think it's such a picture of even like our culture and how polarized things are. And as an organization, we're abolitionists. We want to end demand. We believe that if we want to reduce the supply of trafficked women and children, we have to look at we use the analogy of a tree, of like the fruit of sex trafficking. If you unpick and assist out women and children from sex trafficking, imagining that's like plucking some fruit off this tree, the branch will grow back. If you arrest a human trafficker, that's maybe cutting off a huge 3 branches, rescuing lots of the fruit. But again, as long as there is a demand, there's a financial incentive for the traffickers to traffic women. The trunk of this tree, you could call the system of organized commercial sexual exploitation, of prostitution, pornography, stripping, the business and cultural system of the commercial sex industry. Then the roots are demand, which thrive in the soil of the pornographic culture that feeds demand. So it's all connected. And we really believe if we want to make a significant dent and impact in reducing the supply of women and children trafficked for sex in our world, we have to go after demand. And that means the sex buyers and pornography. And that looks like campaigning around both of those things and legislating around both of those things and knowing that the marketing force, pornography is the marketing force that leads buyers to buy. I think what made our film controversial is that we humanize the buyers. We tell their stories in order to understand how they got there. Like we can't ever prevent something if we don't understand the journey to getting them there. So we try and unpack their childhood stories of what led them to become sex buyers. And every single man we interviewed was exposed to hardcore violent pornography at a young age. And obviously not every child who is exposed to that goes on to become a sex buyer, but in the case of every sex buyer, that was a part of their trajectory and story. But every single man we interviewed, the reason they had the courage to go on camera and share their story with us is because they're former buyers. They've all gone through a form of rehabilitation and now recognize the real harm it brought on them, their families, and our society and the victims. And so they told their stories on camera with the hope of it shifting the behavior and it making a difference. And so there's a kind of a hope at the end of the film, like it's possible for men to be rehabilitated and to stop becoming sex buyers. And to me, that's a really hopeful message that our movement really needs to hear. Like rehabilitation is possible, prevention is possible. Like how can any of us really stay in this work long term if we don't believe it's possible to prevent and to change? But I think for some people, maybe for some radical feminists, to humanize the men in any degree was just very triggering. And it's more comfortable to put men in the category of they're all violent or all have the capacity to be violent, therefore none of them can be trusted, or every sex buyer is a rapist for life. Rehabilitation is impossible. And I have met some survivors who don't believe that a sex buyer can ever change their behavior, but because one of the men from the film actually toured with us in the US, and he's been out of that life for nearly 40 years, and he really wanted to just bring that in-person apology. And it was very powerful for survivors to hear that from him. But I also really understand the way that a survivor is on their healing journey and how they relate to men or sex buyers. That is completely up to them. And I can understand, like, a film such as this brings up so much raw emotion. And if they misunderstood or thought that we were trying to present these men as victims and absolve responsibility, like, absolutely not. We're calling for accountability. We want the Nordic model, the Swedish model of law to be passed in every country in the world that makes it a felony level crime for a man to be a sex buyer. That is the law we 100% support, as well as decriminalizing people exploited in prostitution. But even beyond that, like, I don't want a man to just go to prison for a few months and then go back. Like, we want to go deeper. We want to find out what's the root of shame, what's the root of that behavior, how do we call for a whole cultural transformation. So the law is a part of that. The criminal deterrent is essential, but even beyond punishing, we want to bring a cultural shift. And so the film, I love that it ends on that note of hope. We're calling for accountability, and we're saying the world doesn't have to be this way. It's possible for men's behaviors and mindsets to change before they go down this path and even after. And to me, that's a helpful message. And Simon Hagstrom, who's the chief police of the prostitution unit in Sweden, he's like a personal hero of mine. He's really helped the successful implementation of the Nordic model there. He watched our film. He's going to be speaking on some of the panels. And he said, to me, it explained without excusing. And that's a really important distinction. We want to understand sex buying in order to prevent it, but we're not excusing that behavior.
I think that's so important that you explained that, because I think some of the feminists are feeling like, oh, don't make me feel empathy for these men, which I kind of get. But at the same time, I do think it's important to understand how these men feel. Like, it's not, the film is not demanding you to, excuse them or feel any certain way. But yeah, you just have to see the buyer side of it. And I want to ask you about I don't know how the Nordic model versus sex work lobby is in the United States. I know that in Europe there's a lot of battlegrounds around it in different countries with different legislations. And I also want to ask about what kind of legislative changes were you able to accomplish with your work? Because I think it's important also for us in Hungary to understand what works elsewhere and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, how is that fight going over there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, so starting here in Europe, for those who don't know, the Swedish, this law that we've just been describing, it started in Sweden 23 years ago. It's passed currently in 8 countries. So Norway and Iceland, which was why it began being called the Nordic model. And then in Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, Canada, France, and Israel. And there's a few other countries that have been looking at it. The European Union a few years ago came out in favour, saying that this was, to me, it's like the minimum law. It's like the minimum law that needs to happen, and then the successful implementation of training the police to do better and more prosecutions. So sex buyers, traffickers, pimps, third parties, brothel owners, that side is all criminalised. And it's an abolitionist law in that it's seeking to shrink the sex industry, reduce demand. I mean, our film really asks the question, is it, what is taking place in prostitution? What is this power dynamic happening? And should it be legal for a man to buy someone in the sex industry? And the way that we understand prostitution, they're not buying sex ultimately, they're buying silence, they're buying consent, they're buying access to rent a vulnerable person's body who either has a pimp and they're having to give 100% of their money to someone else who's controlling them, or they're sending money back home because they're a single mother or in a financially difficult situation. Whatever the situation is, as a society, we are failing women if we present prostitution as a viable way for them to support their family, when all the evidence shows the trauma it inflicts on the mind, on the body. There has to be better options that we can support struggling women who are in a financially desperate situation. And so the pro-sex work lobby that are trying to, they're not even trying to legalize. In America, there's one state that has a few counties, Nevada, where brothels are legal. But to me, seeing what Sweden have accomplished with this law, where so they don't arrest women, that prostitution is not seen as a criminal offence for a woman to do. They understand that most of them are victims or in a financially difficult situation. They need supportive services, exit services, programs, optional. It's not forced on them. It's given them as an option, but supported by the state. And then for a trafficker, if you're a trafficker, maybe in Hungary, thinking, would I traffic these 20 girls to Sweden where I would be arrested and all the clients would be arrested? Or I could take these 20 women to Berlin where it's all legal and I wouldn't be as easily criminalized because I'm presenting myself as a manager. And so we're going to be screening this film in Berlin. There's a big abolitionist movement in Germany right now that's wanting to overturn legalization, that's seen where you legalize something, you really do normalize it. And so you have between 1 and 1.5 million men in Germany every day who buy sex. And laws are really important when it comes to prostitution. I don't believe that men should have the legal right to purchase the consent of a vulnerable person. When we're talking about the rights of people when it comes to prostitution, this always comes down to the right of the man, because he has the money, the power, the agency. He is in control of this exchange. It's nothing to do with what she wants. Prostitution is the most extreme form of harmful sexuality for women. It is nothing about her pleasure, what she wants, what she's interested in. It's all about him, and she has to cater to his demands from a menu. He's buying a sex slave experience from the pornography he's watched, the fantasy he wants to act out. He's buying a power dynamic where she is his slave and he is in control. And the mental hit that he gets from that sense of power that our film, the men on camera, share with us. And so in the anti-trafficking movement, we're always talking about the victims and then the dramatic act of human trafficking and how horrific that is. But so the supply wouldn't exist without the demand. And so we really want to be bringing up this conversation of, okay, just even saying this exact statement, if every man stopped buying a woman and child in sex today, sex trafficking would end today. We know that's not going to happen overnight, but let's just pause on that concept for a minute. What do we think about that? What would it take to get there? And a lot of the people think, well, it's impossible for men to not buy sex. And at our screening in Madrid, we had a man say on the panel, if you don't eat or breathe, you die. If you don't have sex, you don't die. It's such a male entitlement mentality to think that they will die if they don't have sex. It's a human right, and that this woman will just have to meet my demand. It is not a human right, and we have to address demand and challenge this mindset that men have to have sex, therefore they can buy someone in prostitution to fulfill that need.
Absolutely. And I think it also cuts to that conversation between partners in a relationship where, the woman would ask the guy to choke her. And I used to facilitate these workshops in schools with the feminist NGO I worked for, where we were talking about sex and healthy sexual relationships and all that, and red flags in relationships. And this question kept coming up, but what if she wants it? What if she's really, this is what she enjoys, and I want her to feel good and all that. And we were asking questions from them, why do you decide to do that, even though she really wants it? You have a decision to make. You can decide not to do it because you don't want to do it. And I feel like that shift needs to change, because in the film also where these buyers talk about, how the prostitute was approaching them And she looked like she's enjoying it and she really wants it. And obviously she's doing it for money, but it's part of this fantasy. Obviously they have to sell these pimps. The women will appear like it's the girlfriend experience or whatever. But I think men have to, think differently. Like, should I do it? Is it okay to do this? And then when they talk about how they actually never cared about the fact that the women might be trafficked or not, or if it's good for her or not. So the entitlement part of it, I think, is really important in the film because these men say it out loud and clear that they do not care what the women experience is. All they care about is their fantasy to be fulfilled, what they saw in porn. And there's like this really powerful sentence that the prostitute is the manifestation of porn, which I think was really powerful because it connected all these, attitudes and the mindset of men to what they will actually be willing to do, even if it's harmful to somebody.
Yeah. It always dehumanizes the woman. She's not seen as an actual person. She's seen as the fantasy, the manifestation of their pornographic desire. They frequently say, it's all about me, what I want. I'm not thinking about her. And so every one of them that was asked, would it have mattered to you if you knew she was underage, if you knew she was trafficked? And they were like, you don't want to think about that. You look past that. What only matters in that moment is how I'm feeling inside and what I want. And there's a powerful scene where one of the sex buyers describes, or the former sex buyers describes, how the fantasy led him to fantasize about raping someone, because it's like, after a while, I'm buying someone in prostitution regularly, but what about the woman that I could never buy, that's out of my reach? And I began fantasizing about how to rape her. I mean, it's incredibly disturbing to hear and watch. But I think that's another important part of this conversation is some people genuinely believe that watching pornography or being able to buy someone in prostitution prevents men from then raping the regular civilian women out in society, when it's actually not true at all. And men who buy women in prostitution are more likely to be rapists or murder a woman in prostitution, or like they are regularly dehumanizing women. And I think that, it's the ultimate dehumanization for women and for men. When you become a sex buyer, you're dehumanized yourself. You're acting out in this like bestial, robotic way. I've done outreach to women in red light districts in 12 different countries. I've seen some of the most horrific red light districts around the world, and we go and we give gift bags to women and hotlines. And if it's in other countries, I'm either training a group in how to do it or partnering with them and going out into the streets or the strip clubs or the brothels with them. And the men that I see walking around these places, their eyes are really dead. They're walking around like in this robotic state. I've seen men grunting around, walking on all fours like an animal, like barking. Very, very disturbing behavior. It just brings so much harm to society, mostly and mainly for women. That's the more obvious side, at least to me. But I think it's important to show how it breaks down what should be healthy relationships between men and women or humans when we begin treating each other like sexual objects.
I just saw an article, it came out yesterday in a Hungarian platform, but it was sourcing some kind of English article about ethical porn. And it said something like, porn was always around, it will always be around. So if you consume porn, you should consume ethical porn or feminist porn or whatever. I wonder what you think about that. Is there such a thing as ethical porn?
Yeah, I feel like that's a question that often gets asked. And I always want to turn back the question of like, we're talking about violence, trafficking, exploitation. And the only question that someone might respond is, what's okay? What's ethical porn? And I'm like, that's actually the wrong question to be asking. How can you ever know the person behind the screen is fully giving consent? Like, I sort of say to them, okay, well, say you're watching porn. Would it matter to you if she was under 18? And they're like, oh, of course. Like, I wouldn't, that's illegal. Okay. Would it matter to you if she didn't actually want to be making this pornographic video, but she's a desperate single mother, desperate for cash, and they're not really thinking about the real life of this woman in the porn I'm like, would it matter to you if she was in surgery for 2 weeks recovering from that injury that took place in the scene you watched? Like, would that matter to you? Would it matter to you if she was doing something that she hadn't fully consented to, or is feeling a sense of even self-betrayal? Pornography is always, in a sense, prostitution with a camera in the room. And so the same dynamics present in prostitution are still present in pornography, of the trauma that they cause women. I actually attended in London a debate between some like radical feminists who are critical of porn and then a director and producer of porn. And the female producer was very proudly telling us, everyone in the audience, I am an ethical porn producer, I'm a feminist producer. And a lot of times, feminist basically just means legal. So they're all overage, they're all being paid, they've all signed contracts. It's just the most basic, not illegal. Or they say, oh, there's more representation.
Right, it's like a bigger girl or like...
like, oh, so I'm including someone who's a plus size, therefore it's more ethical. Or it's LGBTQ, or there's more people of color. Like, absolute distractions. Like, that really doesn't make something ethical. So this woman is sharing about her porn production company, and then she started boasting. She felt very proud of this. She was saying that the women that I've employed in my porn sets, some of them are immigrants, are refugees. They were fired recently. I'm providing jobs to some of the people who need it the most. And I was like, do you realize what you just exposed about the way you're exploiting some of the most desperate people who maybe can't even earn money legally, and you're employing them as a female pimp, essentially, getting them to have sex on camera. And I just thought, if this is what feminist porn is, like, this is ridiculous. And I think feminist or ethical porn being slapped on porn as a label is trying to sanitize what is ultimately a really, there's so many problematic things in this industry. And of course, our mission is to like bring about regulations. And so in a weird sense, we're trying to make this industry more ethical. But at the core of it, I don't believe prostitution can ever be ethical. It always causes harm. It always causes trauma. And I just think we need to be asking way better questions as humans of, could I just not watch porn? Could I just not develop this voyeuristic sense of entitlement where I have a sexual relationship with my phone or people that I'm dehumanizing and observing? It's kind of a modern day equivalent of like peep shows. You wouldn't want to go to your neighbor's house and watch them have sex in the window. Like, that's watching people having sex who you don't know is weird. And what if you find out that the neighbors next door, the woman's actually being abused and raped, and you're watching that? Like, I probably wouldn't say some of these things in every context, because I think I want to be able to have nuanced conversations. And we talk to people who are in the porn industry and who are directors and producers. And I know it can come across as extreme to be so critical of prostitution and porn. And I really get that a lot of people are on a journey and they can't really imagine a world without, or they can't imagine their life without watching porn. But there's so much increasing evidence on the harms that it brings people. I just think, like, do you really want to play any role in this industry? And every time you're watching porn, you are creating a demand for this content by your participation in it.
I just wanted to say the same exact thing. When you said, do I have to watch this? Like, I was talking to a young woman who was asking me about my opinion about porn. She was asking about ethical porn. And I said, look, even if we forget for a moment that there's an industry behind this, even if we're not talking about the Mind Geek sites or all these platforms with the horrible content, and say there's this tiny island on the internet where it's like only, consenting adults having sex, and you want to watch that. Why do you have to watch this? Why is it a thing that you want to watch this? And why can't you imagine your sexual experience without porn involved in it? Like, even if you just want to masturbate or whatever, why do you have to have this visual thing in front of you? Or why do you have to have it in your relationship? And she really started to think about it because she was like, well, I never asked this question. Like, I never thought about it not being around or not being part of the sexual experience. And I'm also, I wasn't born like a feminist. So I also had to come to this conclusion because I remembered at the end of when I was still consuming some porn, I just remember feeling so just desperate to find something that doesn't feel icky and weird and awful. And I feel like more and more women are watching porn. I know that the numbers say that, but I feel like women are just desperately trying to like it and find ways to consume forms of it. And that's why feminist porn and ethical porn is coming up, I guess. But I also feel like it's not cutting to the root of the problem. Like, why do we have to do this? Yeah. And also, I think it connects to a lot of the body image issues women have. Like, when you're having sex, for women, it's normal to like look at yourself as like a third person. You're not in your body because you're used to having this visual image of how you look, why you're having sex, and how does your body look. And I think it just takes such a long time for women to be in their bodies and have sex without all these insecurities. So I don't see how any kind of porn, helps with that, to get in your body and really enjoy having sex. So yeah, it's just, for me, I also came to this question at the end, like, why do you have to do this?
We really want to investigate this subject even more than we have. And so we're actually in the early stages of creating a documentary just on the impact of pornography on women as consumers, or just as how our culture impacts women just exclusively, and what female porn addiction looks like, and just like really looking into female sexuality and why is it that, like, does big porn have the interests of female sexuality? Like, no, they are greedy for money. They just want consumers. They haven't even put age verification barriers on their websites because they know that children accessing their sites gives them more money and more traffic. They could have put age verification barriers in at any time. The technology already exists, and they haven't because they don't want to spend the money on it. And so the sexuality of women and children should not be in the hands of these people. And I just think we made a film that's on Netflix called Liberated, and it really looked at like hookup culture. And at the time there were a lot of like college campus rape. It was like blowing up in the news, and there was a situation of a gang rape on a beach where loads of students were filming it and had their camera out. And so we really wanted to make a film about looking at this. And then we interviewed a lot of young people about their perception on sex and dating and hookup culture. And I think that we talk about being a sex positive organization, but we want to redefine what it means to be sex positive. And we don't think that the porn and prostitution lobbies and industries should be able to label themselves as sex positive when actually they're destroying sex and sexuality. You mentioned earlier that a lot of boys can't have sex with real women after long porn addictions. And we've heard from many guys who experienced erectile dysfunction. Hugh Hefner famously could never have sex without watching porn first in his Playboy mansion. And I think that's the extreme of where this goes. It's so deeply unnatural. Imagine it historically, a boy or a man has never had so much visual access to naked women, never had so much choice, comparison, like what it's doing to his brain and the twisted sense of fantasy and reality. I think that we're in the age of the internet. The generation growing up has more access to the most violent porn than we've ever seen in history. So we're at a really interesting and critical moment. We're kind of in this social experiment, and our sexuality is the experiment from the porn industry. PornHub are very, very proud of that. They boast of having the most data on human sexuality in the world. They brazenly sell that data and capitalize on it and release these reports every year of all the different countries, the different type of porn they're watching. And so we are this experiment for big porn, and it is possible for a cultural campaign to shift their mindsets, and in 10 years' time, they may look back on, oh my gosh, children could access porn, and porn sites didn't have to verify age and consent, and women thought that choking was okay. Like, my hope and dream is that in the next few years, we really start to see girls and women rise up. I mean, for Billie Eilish, like, I don't know how big she is over here in Hungary, but in America, she's huge. And for her to boldly on this podcast say, watching porn, violent porn, like, really had a damaging negative impact on my life. As a result of that, this one senator who was inspired by that, who was inspired by seeing the way that we were bringing or encouraging lawsuits against these big porn companies, called for age verification so that you can't access porn under the age of 18 without putting in your ID through a third-party encrypted app. And that there's like 22 states that have introduced that, 7 that have passed that. So even in just a few months, we're already seeing like a cultural shift around that, and in different countries. And the fact that even just being in Budapest a few days, the conversations we've had where the topic of porn comes up, and it's like there's an awareness now of its harm. And so I think we're just at the beginning of this conversation, and we need to take it so much further and educate people on the harms of porn. But we also want to present a better world. We're not just against this, we're for good relationships that are safe and meaningful, and we're for good sex in relationships that is fun and brings joy and brings connection and intimacy. We're for healthy relationships. We're for healthy child development. We're for healthy girls, healthy women, and healthy men. And so I just see the extreme damage that pornography has brought on all these sectors of society. And I think it's time for the industry to be held accountable. And we're seeing a lot of stories come out and it's a very interesting time, put it that way.
And I want to add to that, because it's an interesting time also because we're, I guess, starting the AI age. And I don't know if you think there's a way to prepare for this, how that will further harm women, because I think that's just such an unthinkably big problem that I don't even know how to. I'm sure you have thought about it, but I don't know.
Yeah, we have had internal conversations a lot in the last few months about that, and I know someone who works in AI, and he's nervous because he's it's not the people behind this are the most ethical. They don't have the ethics of humanity in mind. I feel like we're on the precipice of something that we don't know how bad it could be. And they're already bringing in talks of bringing in regulations before it's even got to that place.
What do you think are the things that we should think about? For instance, putting, a woman's face over a video, because deepfakes have existed, of course, but this is another level where you can't tell if it's a real person or not.
Exactly.
What else do we, or regulators should think about, you think?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a tech expert politician when it comes to this, but I think just exactly what you said, the fact, if it is true that it's going to be impossible to differentiate what is a true image from a false image, I mean, the impact on the news, on journalism, on pornography, on anything, it's truth goes out of the window. What is true anymore? You can't trust anything. You can't trust anybody. And there's already companies that offer send us an image of a woman that you desire to be with, or your favorite celebrity, and they will create a pornography video from that digital image, and that's already illegal. We interviewed a survivor of what was an iCloud hack leak. That was one of the first situations where a lot of celebrities had this happen to them, of their private images were hacked on their phones and then leaked. But imagine if online are all these videos of celebrities as porn stars. I mean, I can imagine there being a lot of people who would want to be suing AI companies for that. I've actually had 2 pimps try and make pornography of me when I exposed their trafficking ring, and they were sending it to me, and they were messaging friends and family. To this day, I don't know who they sent those to, but I remember just thinking, wow, this is how traffickers are so used to weaponizing women's sexuality against them. I don't really know exactly what the worst case scenarios are when it comes to AI. I almost don't want to let my mind imagine that. And I'm just hoping for the best. And I feel we're in this really weird tension of we're seeing a lot of regulations and improvement, and we're also seeing the possibility begin to slowly open up for like some of the worst case scenarios. But I try to be optimistic and dwell on the changes that we are making. People who are developing tech at such a fast rate have massive responsibilities, and we need to not just let that like develop completely unchecked.
Isn't it crazy how it's completely normalized to watch porn, but women are still shamed for appearing in one? It's just so crazy to me that revenge porn is a thing, but at the same time, you know, every man expects porn to be around and women to provide for them in a visual way or in a real way. So it's like, it's just amazing. But if one naked photo gets out of you, you're still, you can still be blackmailed with that and shamed for that. It's just so crazy.
Yeah, there's so much hypocrisy in that.
Helen, thank you so much for this conversation.
Definitely, you know, so many intense topics, but so important, and I'm really happy to see and hear them happening here in Budapest. And thank you for really wanting to have this conversation, and just for your thoughtful questions and the activism that you're doing. And for our film screening tonight, I'm excited and curious to see what the outcome and the impact is.